Hey Scorpio, this is your year ahead horoscope and astrology forecast for the entire year of 2026. My name is Chris Brennan, and joining me today is astrologer Leisa Schaim, and we're going to give you a big picture overview of the year ahead. So, hey Lisa, thanks for joining me for horoscopes this year.
Hey, Chris, glad to be here.
So, big picture themes, major transits, let's jump right into it and not waste any time. So, here's the planetary movements calendar that shows where the planets will start at the beginning of the year and how far through the signs of the zodiac they'll get by the end of the year. And here's a slide with the major transits that we're going to be talking about and some of the dates over the course of 2026. So, the first major transit we get into right at the top of the year is that Saturn and Neptune both depart from Pisces, where they've been transiting for years, and they're going to move into the sign of Aries in January and February, which is moving from your fifth house of children and love and romance and sexuality and hobbies, and it's moving into your sixth house of work and health. So this is a major shift in terms of these two outer planets departing from one sector of your chart where they've been for a while and moving into a new one.
Yeah, so this should bring alleviation of some pressures or some extra work you've had to put into fifth house topics. So for some people I know with Scorpio rising, they've had to put a lot of extra work into things involving their children. Their children needed extra support, extra help during this time. For other people, their love life had kind of constraints around it, or some nebulousness with Neptune there as well. But definitely with Saturn there, it's usually not as much of a lighthearted time. And so those are alleviating now as they move out of your fifth house into your sixth house. So that's the good news with regard to the absence of those transits, lightening up whatever you've been dealing with for the last few years there since March 2023 when Saturn went into Pisces.
Yeah, for sure, which is great. Especially like fifth house topics can especially be children, the topic of children. So if there's been any challenges or struggles or setbacks with the topic of children for you over the past 3 years since Saturn went into that sign in March of 2023, that should see some alleviation. This is also one of the romantic sectors of the chart. So if there's been any issues involving love or romance or sex and sexuality over the past few years, then that should also see an alleviation of that topic, as well as with Neptune transiting there for most of the past decades since like 2011, Neptune brings a certain nebulousness and ambiguity to that area. So for some people, this may have coincided with some like situationships where you're not really sure what something is. And I think with Neptune departing from the fifth house, that should also clear some of the fog or the smoke from that area and make things a little bit clearer than they have been over, let's say, the past several years, especially.
Definitely. So now those two planets, Saturn and Neptune, are moving into Aries and to your sixth house of work and health, coworkers or people you hire to help with anything, as well as pets and other animals. So we have had a preview of those transits already in the second half of 2025. Saturn and Neptune were both in there for a little bit, and especially peaking in July. So if you think back to what was going on in July for you, especially with regard to those topics, one or more of those topics, that's when they got the closest to exact with regard to their conjunction in your sixth house. So they're going to go exact finally in February there. So this can mean for some people, there can be structures that are sort of dissolving in one of those topics in your life. For other people, you can start to have some idealism around like the work you want to do or how you want to go about work. And you have to blend it with that Saturn quality of making that real. This can also be for health topics, a time where there can be nebulous health concerns that come up. I know with a lot of the Libra rising people who just had those transits finish or are finishing them now. Sometimes people had things where they needed like a second opinion, or they were just hard to diagnose health topics or health issues. So that can be something that comes up during this time.
Yeah, for sure. Just with Saturn going into the sixth house of health, sometimes there can be some challenges or setbacks that arise when it comes to health matters or having to institute a greater degree of structure and responsibility to that area than at other times in your life. So it can be a really good time to get serious about health issues, either to address current things that arise or in order to sort of warn against or make it so that other things don't arise in the future if you take better care of yourself and become more responsible in that area now. The only tricky part is just in February, especially when Saturn and Neptune form that exact conjunction in your sixth house. I've been calling that the reality distortion field, and I think that's going to really peak in February at that exact conjunction. So it may be kind of hard for you to really tell the difference between what's real versus what's not, or what's true versus what's false, and greater sort of tendency to be a bit confused in that area when it comes to health matters at that time. But luckily, that conjunction will start to move away after February, and things should start to become a little bit more clear after that point. And while I emphasize health things, this could also apply to work things, since the sixth house is also the place of work. And so sometimes there can be issues that arise in your workplace. Some of those can be kind of nebulous and they can coincide with setbacks, but ultimately, it can also just be a period of hard work and having to push through things and gaining greater responsibility, especially in that area.
Definitely.
All right, so that's our first major transit of the year. So let's go to the next major transit, which is that starting in February and going through into March, we get our first eclipse season when there's going to be eclipses taking place in the signs of Aquarius and Virgo, which is your fourth house of home, living situation, and parents, and your 11th house of friends, groups, and alliances. So eclipses represent major beginnings and major endings in these two areas of your life. And let's focus a little bit on the first one, the fourth house one first, because that one's taking place in the house that represents your private life, right?
Right. So the first eclipse in Aquarius will be the first in that series of the Aquarius Leo eclipse series. And that happens in your fourth house of home, family, living situation, private life, can have to do with your parents or even ancestry beyond your parents, or things having to do with the past or hidden things. So any of those topics can have beginnings or endings coinciding with this eclipse. And it's kind of also punctuating this much longer and slower Pluto transit through your fourth house. That first dipped in 2023 and then really got going as of the end of 2024. So that's a long, long transit. It doesn't move signs until 18 more years. So that's not something that happens all at once. It depends on your specific chart factors as to when that peaks. But this eclipse could set off those same topics that have started this sort of long, slow death and rebirth quality that Pluto has when it goes through a house. And so there can be some changes happening with regard to things involving your parents, if your parents are still around. So either needing to help your parents more or something changing with regard to your relationship with your parents, or just something happening in their lives. It can also easily coincide with a change of living situation. So like where you're making your home, either your actual apartment or house, or it can be a geographical move, like where do I want to be in the world?
Yeah, so I commonly see people move when it comes to eclipses taking place in the fourth house because let's say somebody's lease comes up or there's some reason that they have to move. So that represents an ending in terms of a major ending in terms of living in one place, but also needing to move to a new one that once you settle represents a new beginning. So these eclipses are going to be taking place over the course of the next year or two in Aquarius. So it's going to be the start of an ongoing series of events or a sequence of events rather than just a singular thing. But it's important to think about it in terms of your living situation and then also in terms of things happening either in the lives of your parents or in terms of your relationship with your parents in general, reaching the end of one chapter and then starting a new chapter. So that's interesting sort of opening there that starts taking place. And then the other part of this is the eclipse happening in your 11th house in the sign of Virgo. And this is pretty important because this is one of the early transits this year happening in the 11th house, and there'll be one other one with the Mars retrograde. But this one is part of a series that's been happening now for more than a year, where it was representing major beginnings and endings with friends and alliances. So there may be some friendships that have run their course and come to an end at this time, whereas there may be other friendships that start out small when you meet somebody new or you start getting into a new social group and it seems insignificant at first, but then it'll turn out in retrospect that that ended up creating a lifelong friendship or a friendship that was much more important than you initially thought when you first met, perhaps even around the time of the eclipse.
Definitely. Yeah, and this can also be beginnings and endings with regard to groups that you belong to, organizations, boards, that kind of thing. So joining or leaving groups at this time. And even things like social media, you could like begin or end a particular social media platform, activity there, as well as social action groups would also go in the 11th house. So this is something, as you just said, is something that's been ongoing. It's not the first eclipse there, but usually with the eclipse series, it's not the case that something will necessarily happen that's really momentous at each and every eclipse, but you can reliably say that at least within that series of eclipses in that house, there will be some sort of important beginning or ending. And so that is that social area for you.
Right. Yeah, for sure. All right, so that takes us into our next major transit, which happens starting in April, which is the planet Uranus completes its long 7 year transit through the sign of Taurus, which it started way back in 2018 and 2019, which was moving through your seventh house of relationships and coinciding probably with some unexpected shakeups and innovations in that specific area of your life. And now Uranus is moving into the sign of Gemini starting in April, where it's moving into your eighth house of shared resources, other people's money, as well as topics of mortality can sometimes come up when it comes to Uranus in the eighth house. So this is a significant shift because this shift is ending one 7 year transit through one sector of your chart and beginning a 7 year transit through this new sector of your chart.
Yeah, so we're finishing up that transit in the seventh house. There'll be a little punctuation in February, a kind of a last hurrah as Uranus stations for the last time in Taurus in your sector of partnership. And then a bunch of inner planets keep activating that by square all month. So there'll be kind of like a last hurrah of, the unexpected changes potentially that have been happening with regard to partnership for the last 7 years. And then it moves into your eighth house where you can have sudden shifts or experimentation with regard to shared resources, shared finances. That can be things like money that you share with a partner if you have a partner, whether personal or business, but it can also be like, partnering more broadly for business reasons and sharing profits from something like that. It can be suddenly getting into like what do I want to do with estate planning like for the first time in your life and writing a will all of a sudden or things of that nature. It can be sudden inheritances if that becomes appropriate anytime in the next 7 years. But it is an experimental time. Um, so especially your partner's money could change because this is an area where it is something where some of those topics you can work on proactively yourself, but other times it'll come from outside of you, like with partner's money or money you share with a partner.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely like unexpected disruptions in the partners. If you have a partner, their financial situation, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. It could be a sudden thing that disrupts their financial income, which then directly or indirectly impacts you. In other instances, it can be something positive, like there's a positive, unexpected change where suddenly they're having much greater income or something like that. Or Uranus can also represent technology, so it can be the use of technology and leveraging new technologies in order to increase your shared income together.
Mhm.
So all of those could be really good manifestations of that, but that's a long-term transit that's going to be happening and playing out all the way through like 2032 and 2033. So we got an initial preview of it last year when Uranus first moved into Gemini in July for a few months, but then it retrograded out and now it's back again for the greater part of the next decade. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. That takes us to our next major transit, which is that the planet Jupiter is going to spend the first 6 months of the year transiting through the sign of Cancer, which is your ninth house of education, travel, and beliefs. And then starting in late June, Jupiter is going to move into the sign of Leo for the entire second half of 2026, going into the first half of 2027. So this is a year-long transit that's going to go into your 10th house of career, public reputation and overall life direction, and is generally a very positive and optimistic transit for career matters, especially if you have a day chart.
Mhm. Yeah, so the Jupiter transit through Cancer that will be there for the first half of 2026 actually started in the summer of 2025. So we're doing the second half of that transit in the first half of 2026. And it's a time where you could already be having greater travel opportunities, just traveling around more frequently or to places you've never been before. It could be times of greater study and sort of positive expansiveness around like studying new things or teaching new things. And then as it goes into, it can also be a time of greater exploration of your belief systems or other people's belief systems. So religion, philosophy, astrology goes in the ninth house as well. Political beliefs can go there as well. And then when it moves into the 10th house, as you said, it's a really positive transit normally for career and how you're known publicly in greater public visibility, I would say, especially in Leo, right? It's like a nice extroverted fire sign. So it's a really good time to be kind of like shining your light professionally, getting professional recognition. So definitely take those opportunities if professional opportunities arise, especially for doing things like in public, like speaking in public or, things that where people will see you. It's kind of the best time in like, I mean, other timing techniques aside, but transit wise, it's one of the best times in like a 12-year cycle for those topics. And it will be more positive for day chart people, but it can still be good and expansive for night chart people as well.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes the connection is the first half of the year, because Jupiter transiting through the ninth house can be about broadening your horizons educationally. It can be like getting some additional training or learning something new, which then in the second half of the year, you can directly apply to your work and your career in order to get a promotion or in order to somehow expand what you're doing in terms of your work and your reputation and overall life direction. So take advantage of opportunities in the first half of the year for education so that you can then get some better opportunities career-wise in the second half of the year. Or alternatively, the first half of the year could also be good for travel with Jupiter going through your ninth house, where the ninth house represents travel to different countries or exposure to cultures and belief systems that are different to what you grew up with or what your baseline is. So it can just be a great time for that sort of exploration of the mind as well as the body. All right. So speaking of that, though, right before Jupiter leaves Cancer, there's this very auspicious Venus-Jupiter conjunction that takes place in the sign of Cancer in your ninth whole sign house. And that actually could be really good for taking a trip or traveling or doing some sort of educational program. And we actually saw this conjunction. We first spotted it because we just finished researching and released our 2026 Electional Astrology report, where we went through the entire year of 2026 and we identified the most fortunate dates over the course of the next 12 months and told people which dates to use in order to launch new ventures and undertakings using the principles of electional astrology.
Yeah, so basically, if you use these dates and times that we've already selected for you to start new ventures, whether that's in your love life or business or home or what have you, or take important actions that you know you need to do during 2026, this will give you the best chances of fortunate outcomes, the best chances of successful results, basically, in what you're trying to do.
Yeah, so the report is a video report that also comes with an audio version as well as an extensive written PDF report. And we go through a monthly forecast of each month, telling you what the best parts of the month are to do things, but also what some of the worst dates are and what dates you should avoid doing things. Because sometimes doing electional astrology is just as much about what to avoid as it is what dates to gravitate towards using. So there's over 28 dates and 28 auspicious charts, plus tutorials on how to use them, and you can apply them for business, love, or pretty much any major life event that you want to do next year. So the report's on sale for the first month for $49.95, but then the price is going to jump up to $65 starting in January. So get the report now at that discount at theastrologypodcast.com/2026 report. All right, that takes us into the second half of the year, where our next major transit is that our second eclipse season begins in August and trails through a little bit into the early part of September, where we're going to have an eclipse in the sign of Leo and then another eclipse in the sign of Pisces. And this represents your 10th house, which is Leo again coming up, and your fifth house of children and hobbies and fun and games and things like that. So, this first one, then, the eclipse in Leo, is going to re emphasize some of those 10th house career themes that we were just talking about with the Jupiter transit in the second half of the year. But in this context, it's going to bring in an additional element of weightiness and of major beginnings and major endings when it comes to career matters around the time of this eclipse in August.
Right. So this is going to be the first one in the Leo sign, the first one in your 10th house, as we had the first one in Aquarius earlier in the year. So this is the other end of that. So important beginnings and endings with regard to career, public reputation, how you're publicly known, whether that's for paid things or unpaid things. And I really like that this is overlapping with that Jupiter transit in the second half of the year in your 10th house as well, because it kind of, there's always more factors to take into account with your full birth chart, of course, but it kind of helps it lean more positive. So even if you have, say, like an ending of one job or something, there's like a new opportunity that you can grab that will be even better for you or something like that. It can also be, as you were talking about with some of the other eclipses, planting the seeds of something that you don't see flower immediately, but it's like an important beginning point that you can look back to later and say, oh, that was actually a really important start for my career.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes that can be a door closing on one career. Like there could be an ending of some career or the ending of a job, but then that forces you in a new direction where you get a new job or it takes you in a new path career-wise. Or in some instances, it's just the ending of one chapter in a certain career and then moving into a new chapter within your chosen career field. Part of this is that the nodes are shifting signs this year into Leo and Aquarius. So this is going to start putting the focus more on that axis of the fourth house of home and living situation and the 10th house of career. And usually these are sort of separate areas of our life that are just completely different because one is like public life and the other is private life. But for some reason, those two areas are going to start to become intertwined in different ways over the course of the next year or two. And sometimes that can be things like there's a situation where you have to move and that affects your job or your career or vice versa, where there's some sort of change in terms of your career that it then also impacts your home and living situation.
Definitely. Yeah, so that's just starting up at this point. And then after that, we have the last eclipse in Pisces. So this is going to be kind of an end cap to all of the activity that you've been having in the fifth house of children, creativity, and things you do for pleasure. And I really like that. On the one hand, it's just kind of like an end cap of like a, coming to closure of all of that extra work you've had to do in that area or the constraint that you've had in that area. But I like that this last eclipse there happens after Saturn and Neptune leave that area for you, because then there's the potential kind of for like that last little ending or beginning in that area to be a little bit more lighter, to be without the constraint that was there for several years.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice having that freed up and then having this eclipse take place to represent the end of that chapter and then fully moving into a new one, which can be a new one with respect to the topic of children, with respect to the topic of sex and sexuality and romance, but also in terms of the topic of like fun and games and hobbies and those things you do for recreation that bring a greater sense of joy and pleasure into your life. That would be a great thing to focus on in terms of this eclipse in the fifth house in Pisces, later in August and earlier in September. So that's eclipse season two. So that takes us now into the last few months of the year, where in October and November, our next major transit is that Venus goes retrograde in the signs of Scorpio and Libra, which is your first house of self and mind and body. And then Venus retrogrades back into your 12th house, which is the house that can represent internal things like mental health. It can also represent people that you don't get along with, or even enemies or people that work against you. So these topics are coming up in a significant way through this Venus retrograde between October through November.
hmm Right. So Venus retrograding in your first house can have you reevaluating kind of how you present yourself or your own sense of self in general, internally, or how you express it outwardly. And typically, the first part of the retrograde cycle is the revisiting, where you're just rethinking, like, how do you do this? How do I present myself? Which is intimately tied with how you see yourself as a person. And then it retrogrades back into your 12th house. And your 12th house is a more hidden area. It can have to do with maybe rethinking how you do relationships and maybe thinking about how like subconscious things of your own, maybe skewing how you interact with other people in relationships or more generally. It can also be a time where your old relationships can come back. And sometimes when it's going through your 12th house, it can be something where like an old relationship comes back and you're kind of trying to keep it secret for a while or talking to them privately, but not really like publicly. There's been some examples in the past I've seen where people had like a secret wedding or something, like they eloped when Venus went into their 12th house because they didn't want the public attention on it. So
Mm.
that can be a thing for some people, certainly not everyone. But yeah, it's going to be connecting potentially those two areas of your life. And then once it goes back forward, you can kind of like implement what you've been mulling over during that time.
Yeah, definitely. And for Venus retrogrades in the first house, like that's a common makeover transit where sometimes people change something about their body or their physical appearance. Sometimes it can be a throwback thing of going back to an old style or experimenting with something new. Sometimes it's a little bit more tricky towards the early part of the retrograde. There can be more experimentation, but usually by the end of the retrograde, you've worked things out and gotten it down better. This one's kind of funny because with the Venus retrograde in the first house, and then it goes, which is like the makeover transit, but it goes back to the 12th house of enemies. And it would be funny if I bet some of the scenarios is going to be like somebody does just like a fantastic makeover, but it creates tension or like enemies because people are like jealous or something like that. It creates sparks jealousy with somebody that then like tries to undermine them.
Hmm. Or attention for people from people you don't want attention from, potentially.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. 12th house, often it can be people you do not want attention from or people that have issues. But you know, I think it crosses the mind body thing as well because the 12th house is often can be so much about personal mental health and sometimes how changing sometimes our outward appearance or something about how we present ourselves to the world can sometimes also reflect in internal changes that are going on within us. And I think with this Venus retrograde in particular, that connection is going to be all the more prominent and obvious how those two things can be interconnected sometimes. And for people with night charts, I think this is actually going to be a very positive transit and might be experienced actually as one of the most notable and positive transits of the year, just because night chart people tend to react to Venus retrogrades much more positively than day chart people, whereas the day chart people are going to be experiencing that Jupiter and Leo transit in the 10th house as more constructive and positive in the career sector.
Yeah, I can see that.
All right, so that is that. And then that brings us to our last major transit of the year, which is that Mars starts slowing down towards the end of the year. And from late September through December, it's getting ready to go retrograde in the signs of Leo and Virgo, which is your 10th house of career and your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances. And Mars doesn't actually station retrograde until the beginning of January of 2027. But by the time we get to late 2026, Mars has entered into the two signs that it's going to go retrograde in, and therefore it's going to spend a lot of time in those two signs. Like usually Mars transits are quick. They're just like 6 weeks, like a month, or like 6 weeks or something like that when Mars zooms through a sign. But here we're going to have Mars camping out in the same two signs for something like 9 months over the course of late 2026 through early 2027, which is going to be bringing some tensions and potential conflict to the area, especially of career and then secondarily to friends and groups. And that, especially for some of the day chart people, could be a little bit more tough energy to deal with at this time that gets layered on top of some of the more positive transits in the career sector from earlier this year.
Right. So with Mars going through your 10th and 11th houses for a very long time, from both the last quarter of 2026 and then into the spring of 2027, you're going to be putting a lot more work and effort, and energy towards career, especially in the first part of it, and towards friends, groups, the larger social sphere, and potentially things that link the two. So maybe a work project that's done in conjunction with other people, with a group, with an organization organization, things of that nature. Now, for night chart people, it's going to be a little bit more qualitatively neutral. Like it's usually Mars transits for night chart people are just you're putting a lot of energy into that area. It's still going to be slowing down already for the in the last quarter of 2026. So you're going to be spending more time there, and you're going to get a sense of the things that are going to crop up that you're going to need to rework during the retrograde when it starts in January. But for the last quarter of 2026, it's just you're putting a lot of energy there, and it's like a medium to longer term work project that involves other people. Now, for day chart people, as you were saying, there can be a little bit more conflict, a little bit more, disagreement amongst people around the realm of career. Definitely, if you have a boss, like for work, be careful about how you interact with your boss during this time, because there can definitely be more conflict there potentially. And then also with the realm of like the social sphere, there can be more conflict. But conversely, you're also going to have the best of it because you're going to have Jupiter simultaneously transiting there for the second half of the year in the career area at least. And so you'll have like kind of the more qualitative extremes there of like more potential for conflict in the area, but also more potential for positive results and success.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. Under the last Mars retrograde, we saw a lot of instances where, because it crossed over two signs and two whole sign houses in people's charts, it would often connect those topics together in this weird and interesting way. So here we're talking about it connecting topics with the 10th house of career and the 11th house of friends. So this could be like you working together with friends on some sort of career project and maybe pouring in a lot of energy towards that for an extended period of time, like an extended and sustained period of energy expenditure, which involves you and a friend or a group of people working on a shared career project. But you want to be a little careful, especially the day chart people, just because sometimes when you mix like friends and work, there can be tensions that arise unexpectedly, or there can be conflicts that arise as a result of that. So definitely be careful blending those two areas and be careful that you do so very not just deliberately, but with great restraint at this time, just because the potential of there being more problematic sides to that could be greater than usual, just with Mars going retrograde in your 11th house and the potential for severing or separation from friends or with friends as a potential outcome.
Definitely. And whatever you're starting or working on at this time, just know that it's going to take longer than you're probably expecting because that's the nature of Mars retrogrades. We're just getting the direct part for the last quarter of 2026, but then it will go retrograde. And so whatever you're working on at this time is going to require some sort of redoing or reworking, at least in part. So it's kind of helpful, I think, to know that ahead of time, just to have like reasonable expectations going forward.
Yeah, although the good news is that with Jupiter transiting there, it has the potential to be more successful than at other times. And with eclipses starting to take place in your 10th house, it has the potential to be more weighty and more impactful in terms of your long-term career and overall life direction, that you might be starting something really momentous at this time. So even if it comes with some issues or takes longer than you might hope, it seems like there's something really important happening for you in the career sector. So it's good to follow up on, achieving some major aspirations this year.
Definitely.
Cool. All right. I think that's the last major transit for 2026. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. Well, those are your transits, Scorpio, for 2026. So, like we said, for help, if you need help planning things or picking good dates to launch things next year, get our Electional Astrology report for 2026, which is on sale just this month for $49.95, but the price will jump to $65 in January, which is still a steal, honestly. But you can get that at theastrologypodcast.com/2026 report. And then if you want to learn more about our approach to reading birth charts and doing astrology, you can sign up for my Hellenistic astrology course at theastrologyschool.com. All right, that's it. So good luck in 2026, and we'll see you again next year.